Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for choosing Across the Fence. I'm Will Michael, in for Fran Stoddard. Faculty at the University of Vermont are known and respected for their teaching and scholarly outreach. They also engage in research in very big ways. The university attracted more than $250 million in research monies last year, which was an all-time record. And for the first time ever, UVM ranks among the top 100 public research universities in the country, according to the National Science Foundation. Students, well, they're also in on the research, and Keith Silver reports on a UVM senior whose childhood loves of science and gardening have blossomed into scientific research that promotes equity and inclusion for all.
And it's kind of moving around a lot. I talked with Tom.
As a student, Rachel Elliott has worked a lot of jobs at the University of Vermont.
The number of research opportunities that I've had is pretty remarkable. I think this is my 8th or 9th job in college.
With one last semester still to go, Elliott is already missing UVM.
What are you going to miss? You're graduating.
My friends. I'm very sad about it. I'm going to miss the library.
The library?
Yeah, I spent way too much time at my undergrad in the library.
Elliott grew up 3,000 miles away in Oakland, California.
I gardened a lot as a kid. I had my little corner of the garden that I spent time in. And then in elementary school, my school had this amazing garden, which is where I started getting more into it and more in an academic way.
And in an AP environmental science class in high school, it all clicked.
The first time that I had been in a science class where where humans were specifically talked about, and the role of humans in the broader ecosystem was discussed.
And the rest, as they say. Elliott applied to UVM because of the reputation of the environmental studies program and the opportunity for undergraduate research.
I had this vision of myself as this scientist, professor type. And so part of my decision to come to UVM was the knowledge that undergraduate research is really big here. Of all the schools I looked at when I was deciding where to go to school, they did the best on undergraduate research opportunities and with bringing the human into environmental science. Those same socio-ecological systems on humans and justice and history and how equity issues like race and class impact people's experience and relationship to the environment, which I, as I've said, find incredibly important and invaluable to have those spaces where it is built into the curriculum to think and talk about race and class and history and justice in a STEM class.
UVM admissions boasts that 92% of undergraduates are engaged in research or internships, which brings us back to the lab and Elliott's research project studying soil quality and accessibility in Burlington under the guidance of Professor Deb Nair.
I just want you to feel confident about what you're doing before you jump in. Our graduate program is relatively small. So in our research, we need undergraduate students to help us build the workforce so we can actually do the projects. I've always felt, even when I was a student, that in a science class where you really learn it is in the lab. I mean, there's one thing sitting in the classroom and you do the book learning. Doing the research is actually doing it and experiencing it. And that's really when the learning comes. And to me, there's always something new to learn, and the new discoveries. I think science is taught like we know everything, but in fact, we don't really know that much.
Working in a lab can sometimes be tedious. How a student reacts to this tedium tells Nair if they have what it takes to be a researcher.
There are different personalities. You can kind of see it in students, whether they like it or not, right? You have to communicate, but there's also a big side of being an introvert. You've got to be comfortable and enjoy working by yourself a lot too, because you spend a lot of time collecting data, and you've got to analyze that data, creating graphs, reading, thinking, writing. There's a lot of creativity in science, and you need those kinds of time where You're not just bombarded with questions and stuff. You need the flexibility and time that you can cultivate that creativity, because that's really what makes good scientists.
The long hours in the lab have given Elliott skills that are not taught in the classroom.
Being self-starting, doing the work, and making sure that I have the background to ask informed questions. Of even if I'm not in a scientific space, having a firm rooting in reality when I'm asking questions and trying to figure out what's going on is huge. When you're in a classroom, most of the time the people in that classroom have similar enough interests that they'll agree that the work that you're doing is interesting or important. But being able to just cold call someone and be like, hey, I'm really excited about this. I have this question and I really, really want to know the answer. And I think you also want to know the answer, and here's why.
You can't just use the same thing for everything.
Life lessons, like managing setbacks, are also experiences Nair believes students learn best in the lab.
Well, I was just thinking back to my experiences as a researcher, and some things that I try to coach students on is you have to really learn how to deal with failures when you do with research, because you're trying things that nobody else has done. You're not following the book. You can have an idea, but you have to do a lot of trial and error. And I often say you're going to have 10 failures for every one that's a success. So there's a life lesson there in terms of how to deal with that. And you can get discouraged, but I think part of it is learning how do we cope with that. Measure the powder first and then put the water in.
It's these lessons and the hands-on and practical aspects of research that have informed Elliott's plans after graduation.
Do you see yourself continuing in research?
I think it depends on how one defines research. I think it's relatively unlikely that I'll keep doing lab work. I've kind of gotten to the point where it's really important to have the data to understand problems. That's definitely real, and if you don't do anything with those data, what's the point?
Right.
I think one of the main goals of science is to understand the world. And our understanding of the world is limited if only academics have what's considered like real knowledge, because I think a lot of people know a lot more about their systems than they think they do. To me, the point of science is to understand the world and give people the tools to live better and healthier and more comfortable and more balanced lives.
From gardener to graduate, Rachel Elliott is ready to be the change they want to see in the world.
I learned a lot about...
At the University of Vermont, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
And a quick footnote, UVM reports that 40% of all seniors are involved in research with a faculty mentor. Joining us now is one of those UVM faculty mentors and a researcher in her own right, Professor Deb Nair from the Plant and Soil Science Department. Professor, good afternoon and thank you for being with us, continuing our conversation about research at UVM.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So working with students like Rachel provides you expressed with a kind of fulfillment beyond scientific success. What are the qualities that students bring to your lab, and as a teacher, how do you foster or guide those students?
Great question. One of the things I often say about being a university professor is that it keeps us young by having people like Rachel come into our labs year after year. They bring a certain enthusiasm, and someone like Rachel brings curiosity. And they want to make a difference. And that is just such a refreshing outlook, especially when we look around us and we're feeling a little down or discouraged, right? So it makes the future feel bright to know we have people like Rachel coming along.
And essential qualities. You talked in the video about dealing with failure.
Yep.
These are the things that really do make for the best scientific research.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I interrupted, Professor.
Yeah, one of the qualities that Rachel has is really an emotional maturity, which is something I always look for in a student, and it's a willingness to take responsibility. It's exciting when things go well, but they also have to claim responsibility when things maybe don't go well or there's a mistake. But those are the learning moments.
So in the video, we also learned that Rachel's research has a focus on issues, as Keith reported, of equity and justice. Are you seeing more scientific-based research projects, either faculty or student-led, that are grappling these more social concerns?
I would say yes, and particularly here at University of Vermont, I think one of our strengths is really being interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary, which means we are asking questions that transcend the natural sciences to the social sciences to environmental justice. And so that's been an area of focus among faculty here at the university, and kind of a future trend. And, one might ask, what is real science? But, there's scientific method in the natural to the social scientists. There's differences in methods that we might use, but there's certainly scientific, we ask scientific questions, we collect data, we go through a similar process.
This is a question, but I'm thinking it must be a little bittersweet to work with these undergraduates, develop relationships, and 2 to 3, 4 years later, you see them leave when their time as an undergraduate has come to an end. What's the ending of those relationships like?
Well, I try not to look at them as an ending, right? But that are beginning. Yeah, it's sad to see them go, but I know there's going to be more bright students coming in right behind Rachel. And it's also wonderful to see them go off on their way and follow their careers and follow their successes. In today's world with internet and all the different media we have, we can follow them. It doesn't have to be a hard goodbye.
Once again, referring to the video, you both talked about working outside the academic community, contributing to research. So how is your research as a soil scientist? How's it informed by those outside the walls of the academy?
Well, I'd say for myself, currently I've linked in with a number of farmers because I work with soil ecology, and I'm particularly interested in plant diseases and how we can manage them. So I look to farmers for questions because they're observing. So they're going to have a better idea of what the priorities are. I've also been contacted from some other people in the community of varying interest because they want a scientific element in the conversation. For example, I've been involved in a group discussing composting toilets and how we can, work with the science so they're safe, but also provide affordable housing, to Vermonters. So that's just come from, I'm a homeowner in the Northeast Kingdom.
And listening, questions that arise and being connected to the community. Deb, the work that you do is great. It was wonderful to meet Rachel, and thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And that's our program for today. We know you have choices, so thanks for choosing us. I'm Will Michael, inviting you to join us back here each weekday afternoon for another visit across the fence.